Today, we're going to do a step-by-step tutorial on how to wire up your NuCanoe. We're going to be using the motor wire kit, item 7160 from NuCanoe, but we're going to differ a little bit and we're going to be using the MotorGuide, which is going to be a great option for running 12-volt lithium batteries. So combining these two, we're going to give you a step-by-step, and this is going to be on the Unlimited. So we're going to be using these wire access plates in the video, but the process isn't going to differ too much for other models. We can talk about that as we go. The biggest difference is going to be not using the plates, but wiring directly in the side. So let's start in the bow here and let's talk about wire placement, plug placement, and how we're going to do the process. So step one is going to be placement with our MotorGuide on our plate here. So again, Unlimited specific here. So currently on our Xi3, we have it installed, and we do already have a MotorGuide plug, but how you could do this without this, we'll have this install process later on, so you'll be able to show that. But taking your plug, I like to see arrow here, so that's how you're going to line it up, the arrow going towards the bow here. Well, what we need to do is get a placement with this plug that's going to allow us to still install our motor. So you can imagine with the motors off, right, you're going to have access to the whole plug, but you want to be able to bend in and plug it in. So I like it right about there. I'm just going to kind of mark the top side of that with a pencil or pen, just so we get some rough measurements there, and that's where we're going to do our install. So we're going to remove our motor next and start drilling out our plate. Okay, so now that we have it marked in a general area for where we're going to want to put our hole for our MotorGuide plug, the next step is we removed the motor, removed the motor mount, and then we took the screws out of our plate here. So now that we have our plate, we have our rough idea. This is going to be pretty similar for most people running the MotorGuide, especially if you have an Xi3, is you're going to be at the bottom, so the stern end of this plate that's set vertically. When you flip it over, what we're going to see is this nut here is going to fit perfectly into the slot. So knowing you're running the MotorGuide, our general mark is on the front end of this, so we're actually going to be tucked all the way up. So we're going to go right about here, and we're going to take our pencil that we talked about and get like a center mark on there. So we have our center mark on there. We're going to go drill this out on the table and bring it back over to the boat. Okay, so we have our center hole marked, and we have our hole saw here. For these MotorGuide, 1 3/4 is going to be the size of hole saw that we're going to need to be able to put that plug through. So make sure whatever plugs you're using to get the right hole saw size. We've got our center part marked. We have a backer piece of board that we're going to go into. We're going to hold it down, and we're going to drill. Okay, and there we go. So now that we have our plate drilled out, we're going to have to run the same 1 3/4 punch down and through into our boat. We want to remember to stay pretty vertical because this is going to be the angle in which our MotorGuide is going to go into our plate. So we're going to drill that out real fast. Okay, there we go. Next up, we're going to remove the plate and install the plug onto the plate. Again, with these MotorGuide, you have a couple options here. So it comes with the backer plate here, and you could install this through and screw it onto there. But what I'm going to opt for here is removing this back nut here. We get that back nut removed. I'm going to take off this plate and essentially use the NuCanoe wire plate as that backer plate. So it's going to look a little bit cleaner on there. But again, personal preference here. So we have our plate drilled. We're going to install the MotorGuide receiving plug like that. Flip to the backside. Reinstall our nut here. Be careful on the first parts of these threads not to cross thread. You can kind of mar these plastic threads up. So what's going to be a little tricky with this install here is we're going to get really close. And it's going to start to want to hit these sides here. So we want to get close, and then we're going to try to twist that top end. And that's going to give us that last little bit of snugness for our plate, just like that. And then I want to kind of arrange it so that my mark faces the bow. Again, personal preference there, but just I always remember the triangle goes towards the bow when I'm installing my plug. So there's that. Next up is going to be wiring, and there's going to be some instructions that come with these MotorGuide that tell us which one's going to be our neutral, which one's going to be a hot, and you can see here there's instructions here too. So like this is going to be our negative here, and our positive is going to be 2. So negative on 1, positive on 2. One thing to keep in mind as we move on to the wiring portion of this project is we're gonna have the two spools of wire here. Obviously we're gonna use red as positive, black as negative. At the end, how are you gonna be attaching the battery from the side of your hole, so in the back when we have the plug in, how are we gonna be attaching that to our battery system? So how we're designing this project today is we're using this battery box, which has a built-in breaker, and then it has these wing nuts here. So what we built, we're gonna build is we have like a negative here and a positive here. So we're gonna have to take two pieces of wire off in the beginning, snip those, set those aside so we can build this little whip at the end. So keep that in mind as you go, but we'll see more of this at the end. So next up, we're gonna be wiring in this place in. So go ahead and take this tape off that comes on there on the back of the NuCanoe. And we have the components here like we talked about, negative and positive here. So 1 is negative, 2 is positive. So we're gonna start with our positive wire here. And it says you can go up to 3/4 back in the instructions. We're gonna go right here, circle this off, move our sheathing. It's gonna take us a second here. Got it. Okay. So then now, in the little baggie that comes in the NuCanoes, we're going to need this tool and one of these little sleeves. Coming on the side here, we're going to loosen both of these on the side. We're going to fit our little crushing sleeve over our wire, insert that in, and then we're going to tighten that down, which is going to crush that wire into our receiver. Okay, so now when we get those tightened all the way and crushed all the way, give it a quick pull, make sure everything's good to go. And that is, we're going to do the same thing with our slot 1 here, which is going to be for our negative. Okay, so now we have both attached there, firm, ready to go. We're going to want to take our wire here and kind of unspool them and get them side by side next to each other so we can feed them through the hole of our unlimited here. And again, if we're using like a Frontier 12 or some other model here that didn't have these plates, what we would want to do is just find a spot in the side or wherever we want to have that plug in. The side is a great option up below the gunnels, but outside of that's going to be the same process. You are going to want to keep that plate on the back of your NuCanoe when you do that so that you can install that. But aside of that, we're going to get these wires side by side and fish them through. So after we get our cables laid out side by side, what we're going to do is take electrical tape and tape them together. It's really helpful to do this at a couple spots throughout the wires to kind of keep them together in the same spot. This is all pretty temporary, this stuff. Okay, so now that we have that wire running side by side as we go, the next thing we're going to want to do, there's a couple options here. You could use fish tape, you could use a couple different things. Since most of us have an ample amount of it sitting nearby, it doesn't get all tangled here like you see. Fishing line is a great option, attaching like a nut or something heavy to it, and then we can throw the fishing line through the boat. So what I have here is I have a nut just on some fishing line. Heavier pound test is great. This is a little bit light, so we'll see if this works out. But what we're going to want to do is get the other end of that line here. So we got our end of our fishing line. We're going to want to attach that to the end of our wires. Again, what I do usually is kind of split the difference between my wires here. So like open my wires up and then tie my fishing line in. That way I have a nice secure point to pull from. Okay. And then I do throw some tape over the top of that to kind of keep it all pointed in the same spot. This tape will be removed at the end, obviously, as we go. Okay, so now we have that. We're just going to be working with the fishing line and the nut. So we're going to take our net, we're going to put it in the hole here, and then we're going to toss it back. What we're going to do is going to be picking up the front of our unlimited and shaking the nut to the back and reaching through that back hatch to grab that. So we'll meet you guys back in the back hatch. So after we fished our wires through here, some tips on this is, again, heavier gauge. So we use a pretty light gauge, so it was a little bit tricky. And when you throw that nut down, the more weight, the better. There's a little grooves kind of you can get stuck on in there, but if you throw a heavy weight, like a heavy carabiner or something like that, and just get that descent all the way through, that'll be easier. And make sure the fishing line is long enough so when you grab it, you're not pulling the wires yet. After the fishing line, start pulling it, have maybe someone else feeding up through, or kind of uncoil it so it's easy to go through the boat. Either way, we got our wires on this end. So we're gonna kind of set these off to the side and focus on where we wanna put that receiver. So it's gonna be the same end, obviously. We're gonna get our second package out, grab our receiving end here and put it in there. I'm gonna do the same process where I'm gonna be removing this plate and putting the MotorGuide straight. I'm gonna use this port here because we already have our center dimple and this is a great access point right here. So we're just gonna pull this off, this back nut. Kind of the same process as we did earlier. Remove this in here and we're just gonna test it. Kind of like with our eyes here and be like, yeah, that'll fit pretty well and we'll be able to reach up in. So something to keep in mind with whatever model you're using, wherever you're putting this thing, you have to be able to reach up and in and put the nut on the underside, right? So just keep that in mind with however you're running this. If you're not running it to an access plate, you're gonna have to have access. So this is gonna be the unlimited. We're gonna be good here. Next up is gonna be drilling our access point here. So one thing we're gonna be careful of is not to put this drill bit through the back side of our boat, right? So just be aware as we're drilling out. There we go. So yeah, kind of easy, nice and light as we go through. Here, like we've talked about, if you have a reamer or you have a razor blade, just kind of cleaning that hole up is a great option. Now, we're gonna have to think this through a little bit. We're gonna take our wires, feed them up and through a hole, and now we're gonna be able to attach them to our receiver and back that down. But something we're gonna have to keep in mind here is the nut. So we almost made a mistake there. So what we wanna do here is you're gonna feed your nut on, you can let it kind of go down the wires, pull your wires up, so that way when you wire in your receiver, pull it down, we can feed the nut up on the backside and tighten that down. So we're gonna speed up through this process. It's the same process we just went through. So if you have any questions, go back in the video and watch that the receiver on the front end of the boat. Okay, so this can be a little bit of an awkward angle here, but getting on the backside, spin that nut, make sure you don't cross thread. It's a little bit of, again, a hard angle to get your arm up into, but you just want to get that nut nice and tight. Something I forgot to mention here is getting this MotorGuide, the seal and flap on here. If you forget to put it on like we did before you put it in here, you can slide the gasket over the side here. But just keep that in mind. You do want that on before you tighten it down so you can close up this plug. Okay, so now that we have the boat wired, the final touch on that is going to be to put the screws back in the front plate, so we'll show that in a second. But assuming the boat is wired up at this point, we have our access points here, everything's good to go, we're going to be attaching our battery. So there's a couple options to do this, but how we're designing this one, like we talked about earlier, is we have a battery like this. The breaker is built in. You're going to want a breaker somewhere in the system. You could put a breaker midway through the boat on your access point on the side if that's something you want to do, but to keep it wired this way, putting the breaker in the box, we're going to need to build some kind of like a whip or something like this, which is going to attach to our wings. So our wing nuts are going to be here. We have a positive and negative, and this is going to be able to plug into the side of our boat. To build this, we're going to take those extra pieces of lengths wire that we got. So I got the positive one here, and we're going to need to attach on from our kit right here. So the next step here is going to be to strip it down like we did earlier. So same process. This 8 gauge can be a little tricky sometimes to work with. Gotta slide that off. Okay. So we expose our wire, slip it on and in. And then we're going to you don't use the cutting side of your tool, you want to use the crimping part there. We're going to crimp it down and on right here. Make sure that's nice and tight. It is. Next is going to be using some shrink tubing that came with it. Cut yourself off a section here. Knife would work a little bit better for this process, but this works just as well. use a heat gun or you can use a torch here. Again, you don't want to burn it, you just want to get it to start shrinking. If you're using a torch like this, kind of rotate around. See it start to close up a little bit. Should get that middle section to close up. There you go, see it starting to shrink. Again, don't want to burn anything, just want to protect that. So it's a little bit personal preference. If we did it right up this joint, you can push it all the way up to here and get that whole joint covered, whatever you want to do. So that's the positive side here. And let's connect it up into our male receiver here. It's going to be really similar to the process we did earlier. Sweet. So we're going to open this up here. So there's 2 screws on the side. This is in the instructions, so go ahead and check the instructions out too for the written ones. But loosening this up, it's going to open up the housing. Okay, so that gets us both components off there. Next up is going to be moving the front of the housing. So these 3 screws here. Okay, so we have the whole housing pulled apart. So make sure you keep all your components. You have the really long screws going through. And then this should look familiar to you. This is basically the same thing that we were doing before. And again, we want to make sure that we get everything lined up. So our 2 is positive, 1 is negative. There's little markers on here, but however you're doing this project, make sure you're consistent all the way through. So we're going to loosen up our positive, our 2. Take the other end of our wire. So there's a little bit of hair showing, but we need some more here. There we go. So that's off there. Next up, we're going to be doing the same process like we said. Get this. So there's a lip on the back of your sleeve here. Put the sleeve back, the lip towards the back of the wire. Go ahead and slide it in. Hold the whole component and crush that sleeve down. Give it a test, a little bit of a pull, and we're good. We're going to repeat the same process with the negative, and then we're going to slip this housing back over, and you have a completed whip. So we finished that whip, and again, we were running a battery box here. This is a Newport Vessels battery box. We were running a Dakota lithium. It's going to be the 12-volt, 100 amp hour. So we have it wired up inside there, pulled up to here. Some safety stuff to talk about real quick is once we connect this one, we're going to have live currents running to our whip, our male end of our plug. So you don't want to be like having this just connected sitting around. It touches metal, it's going to complete that circuit. So what I like to do here is, first off, the arrow we talked about earlier, lined up with our arrow. We can plug this into the side of our boat, and then we'd be good. And this is usually when I connect my live. In fact, you can also do the negative second as well. It's a good safety protocol. So you'd be able to come up here, hook up, wire that in, bring our negative, and this is going to complete our circuit. Tighten that down. So, and then we'd strap our battery box down for keep it safe. But this is going to be live here in the back. Now let's take a look at the front and see how that whole project turned out. Okay, so one thing we didn't show, we talked about a little bit, is tightening down these screws on your plate with your gasket down there. That's going to wrap up that front part of the project that we talked about. So we have our cover there. So what we have left, so we're wired up. We've got power going to here. We're going to bring our Xi3, our other bow mount motor, drop it on, put our pin in. Okay, so we're there. And now, remember how we talked about the space in there? So it looks like we did our spacing really well on this one. Our arrow is going to be facing up. We're going to drop it in there with just enough room to get that MotorGuide going. And you can see our lights already coming on. Make sure that's nice and snug. We can deploy our motor. it to lock in. And there we go. And that's going to complete the project of putting wires through the hole of our Unlimited. Again, the same method works on all the models with little variances on that plate, especially in the bow there. But as you can see, we have a nice open, clean deck, no wires running. We have batteries in the back, Xi3 in the front. So enjoy and have a good time on the water.